This is the Voyage Report podcast, where you get the scoop on travel. Now, the editor-in-chief of the Voyage Report, Mark Albert.
Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome. Here at the Voyage Report, we like to keep you up to date on travel trends, and we've shared a lot of them in our previous episodes. Well, have you heard of this one? A new tool to help some passengers find their way through airports. Larry Skutchan is the Director of Technology Product Research at American Printing House for the Blind, and he helped create this new feature. He joins us today via Skype from the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. Larry, welcome to the Voyage Report podcast.
Thank you, sir. Good morning.
Good morning. So, Larry, this tool is called Indoor Explorer. It's all about helping blind and visually impaired travelers. Tell us a little bit about how it works.
Okay. Well, the app is actually called Nearby Explorer, and Indoor Explorer is a feature in Nearby Explorer. And the way it works is that Nearby Explorer is a GPS app for blind users. And it's a little different from what a sighted person would use as a GPS aid, in that it describes your environment as you proceed through it. So as you're moving down the street, for example, it may say two-way or Main Street to the left and right in 50 yards. So it'll describe intersections to you. It'll tell you what places you're passing and so forth. And the Indoor Explorer part of that extends that concept into the indoor spaces. And the way it works is that through a combination of two things. One is we have mapped the floor plans and points of interest and put them into OpenStreetMap. And then we place low-energy Bluetooth beacons in the venue. And those beacons correlate to a place in OpenStreetMap where we have actually put the latitude and longitude of the beacon into the data, so that as you're moving along, the app trilaterates using the signal strength and the latitude and longitude of those beacons to give you an actual position on Earth. And then the app works exactly the same way as it does outdoors after that, telling you what's coming up and what's around you. And what you can do also is point the phone. So as you're moving along, you may hear passing Starbucks on the left or TSA entrance coming up in 50 yards. What you can do, though, as well, is take the phone and turn it sideways and point it kind of like a flashlight and see what else is around you. And you can adjust the radius so that you can focus in on things that are a little closer, or if you need to see things further away, you can expand the radius out. And then also you can hold the phone oriented in a portrait, and just like you're taking a picture, and that's our compass mode. So it'll tell you the direction you're pointing and then all the things that are in that direction for your given radius. So what it does is really gives the blind traveler a good orientation tool so that they can make decisions for themselves and know what's going on around them.
And so since it relies on Bluetooth, technically you wouldn't even have to have a cellular connection if you were in the airport, correct?
That is correct.
So let's play a little bit of what the app sounds like in action. Take a listen.
Starbucks entrance. Saw checkpoint entrance. We are moving sidewalk northbound. South entrance 37 feet south. Concourse A. Entrance to Concourse A.
So, Larry, you flew to Las Vegas from Louisville International Airport in Kentucky to attend CES. Describe for us the experience of being guided by the feature. We just heard a little bit about it, but how was it like to actually rely on it for directions?
Well, it's nothing short than amazing. So when I got out of, my daughter dropped me off at the front doors of the airport, and right away, even before I got in the door, it told me I was at the central main entrance, and I walk into the airport, and it says, "You're by the Southwest counter," and I knew if I didn't know the airport, I could have pointed around, but I knew I needed to take a right there. So I walked and I went past the Delta counter and the American, and I could point my phone and say, oh, there's the TSA over that way. So as I'm walking down to the TSA area, it's describing each of the elevators, the stairs, the escalator, shops that are along the way, restaurants. What I like to equate it to is digital signage, so that it's very equivalent to a sighted person looking around and seeing what's around them. And we as blind travelers don't have that luxury. Our best things are to be able to hear or to smell. And those are good indications. You often miss things like a Brooks Brothers or a charging station from hearing or smelling. And I do want to emphasize, you still need to use your other senses. You still have to use a cane or a guide dog. You still have to use your hearing and your smell, and still use all your normal precautions that you would for orientation and mobility. But again, this is digital signage that lets you know what's in your environment as you move through it.
It's billed as the first of its kind for visually impaired travelers. So in that sense, what you're describing sounds kind of revolutionary for the visually impaired traveler.
I believe it is revolutionary, yes. And it's the thing that also helps make it more revolutionary is that it's scalable. So, OpenStreetMap is very much like Wikipedia in that it's a crowd-sourced mapping tool. So our folks there at APH have gone into that tool and worked with the venues to get floor plans and beacon placement information, and so anybody can use this information. It doesn't just have to be our app. It so happens that our app is the first one, but we've purposely designed it so that not everybody is going to have to reinvent the wheel to be able to take advantage of this, because this is never going to be successful if it's just a spotty little place here or there that we are doing. The key to the success of this is to make it universally available.
Listeners, you can download the app Nearby Explore in your Apple App Store. It's $79.99 and covers millions of points of interest in the United States and Canada. It's 4 gigabytes, so with all that incredibly useful information, make sure you've got enough space on your phone. Larry,
let me clarify that. Let me clarify. There actually is a free version. It's called Nearby Explorer Online, and it does not use the 4 gigabytes. So that 4 gigabytes, the what you're paying for there is NavTech maps of the entire United States. And Canada. So you don't need that to use the Indoor Explorer feature. The Indoor Explorer feature. You can just download the free one, and then if you want complete outdoor maps, you can purchase the full version.
Even better. And how many airports does it include now? We know it has Louisville.
That's the only one so far. We're just getting this thing rolled out just now. We've taken a lot of surveys of blind pedestrians, citizens, travelers at many of the conferences around the country, and trying to focus in with our partners in Louisville from institutions and organizations like the National Federation of the Blind and the American Council of the Blind to get feedback from people about, how we should prioritize these. So this is all really part of an initiative from the president at American Printing House for the Blind to help make Louisville the most accessible city in the world. And this is just one of the aspects of that. So we're focusing on Louisville right now. We've seen a lot of interest from other airports. So we're in the process of developing plans to be able to help other airports get this installed. We have all the information about how to do it is available in the documentation in our app. So if an enterprising individual or a group wants to map a building and place beacons, all that information is in the manual, but we're realizing and did know, in fact, that not every institution is going to have the resources to be able to do this themselves. So we're working on plans to be able to offer this service to other places, and airports seem to be one of the ones that are more interested in it. We've also had some local interest from hospitals and other public venues. We've been working with the mayor's office in Louisville to start working on public civic buildings in the area. We've done a couple of, one library, and in process with the main library downtown in Louisville. One of the things that the survey results indicated was that shopping was an important part of this whole piece of the equation. So we have a Kroger in our neighborhood that has a fairly high concentration of blind people. So that's probably one of the other things we'll do there. And the way this would work there is, you're not obviously going to be able to describe every product on the shelves, but what we'll probably do there is, as you're moving down the aisles, we'll give the information that's on the head sign above the aisles, and then leave it to you as an individual to focus in on the product, just like a sighted shopper does. The malls are another place of interest to a lot of the people on the survey. So we'll be focusing on the results of those surveys and that information to guide what our priorities are on this.
I think I heard, Larry, you say somewhere that you've been flying through that airport in Louisville for 30 years. You had kind of the red carpet when you announced this. You had a news conference there in December 2017 to announce the rollout. But tell me, what made you want to create this feature for an airport?
Well, it's really a natural progression of using location-based information to help orient a person. One of the biggest problems of blindness is orientation and mobility. And so, outdoor location apps have been very popular in the blind community for several years. And, it's so liberating to be able to tell exactly where you are and what's around you that, again, the natural progression was to move into the indoor spaces next.
And I think you've said also it's empowering.
Very. It's liberating, empowering. I've been blind for 40 years now, and one of the things that's the worst about blindness is this feeling of helplessness at times. And whatever you can do to regain your independence is a win-win for everybody.
Listeners, we're chatting with Larry Skutchan from the American Printing House for the Blind. You can follow Larry and his team on Facebook under American Printing House for the Blind, on Twitter at APH for the Blind, and on YouTube under APH, American Printing House for the Blind. Larry, let's talk a little bit about you. You grew up on a farm in Arkansas, right? Your dad spent 20 years in the Air Force. You lost your eyesight when you were 19?
That's 20, yeah. And went to school in Little Rock, Arkansas. I thought I was going to go into the law, but I got bit by the computer bug and started developing accessible. I was actually taking a lot of English classes in college, and back in those days we were writing on a typewriter, believe it or not. And so when I first got this Apple IIe, I wrote a word processor so I could write papers with, and it was a feeling very similar to this, to be able to gain some independence. I could type out the papers just fine, but I couldn't proofread them or anything like that. So when I got this word processor written, it was just amazing, because not only could you write the stuff down, but you could go back and edit and insert all the things you do with a word processor. One of the funny kind of little side stories of this word processor is I was trying to figure out how to line up the cursor as you press down arrow to go through the document. And I realized, why are we doing this? This is a sighted restriction to keep the cursor in a line. What you really want to do is move from thought to thought or sentence to sentence. So I rewrote it so that when you press the down arrow, it would move by sentences, and it would drive sighted people crazy because the cursor might go down, 2 lines down and 40 characters over or whatever. But it was great for skimming through a document quickly and getting the thought and being able to move through it. So, yeah, I've been in the computer business ever since. Started working for American Printing House for the Blind in 1985. I left for a little while and started my own software company, wrote a couple of screen readers, which is a tool to provide feedback about any kind of application that you run. And then went back to APH in 98, and I've been there since and loving it and hope to be there many more years.
So, Larry, just so inspiring to hear your story about being a computer programming and not letting your visually impaired status limit you at all. Where did you get this sense of perseverance then when you first lost your sight when you were 19 or 20? Where did that come from?
Boy, that's a great question. It's really pretty simple. You either sit there and die, or you grab life by the horns and do something with it. You've got to deal with what you're dealt. And, I look at it in a lot of ways as an extra challenge to my life. And I've been really fortunate that I can help other people that are blind and visually impaired with, I don't know if it's a talent or extra perseverance, like you say, or what, but, I feel blessed that I've been able to make a contribution to society and been able to benefit my own life as well.
Well, we should all look up to you as an example and be as and persevere as much as you have. Congress passed the American Disabilities Act in 1990, almost 3 decades ago. Larry, do you think that technology has kept up with the intention, the spirit, the requirements of the law?
Technology is keeping up. The laws aren't keeping up. So, it's pretty inspiring looking around here at CES to see how many more things have become accessible over the past probably decade or so that I've been coming to this conference on and off. And, there's still some major problems. And one example I like to give is the idea of appliances. When you go to buy a washer and dryer these days, there's a panel there with no tactile feedback. In the old days, you dialed in the setting you wanted. You could mark it with a piece of a braille. The buttons, there were usually 3 buttons for the temperature and the water level. And then you would dial in the cycle you want and hit start. Well, now, those kinds of appliances are becoming much more difficult to use, but through the advent of things like voice assistants and connecting to appliances like washers and dryers. In fact, I have a sous vide machine at home or circulator, I should say, that I can control through Alexa. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that word on the radio. But I can just tell it what temperature I want, and it starts up. Just got a Instant Pot pressure cooker, and they've got an app that you can pair with the Bluetooth on your phone, and the app is accessible, so you can operate the thing completely independently. There's still some problems. I think one of the biggest ones is with stereo AV equipment. They're pretty complicated for a sighted person anyway. But we're seeing some inroads into that as well. Televisions just last year have started becoming accessible due to the, I'm going to get the name of this wrong, Digital Accessibility Act, I think it is. So now when you buy a television, it has a screen reader on it. And you can, for the first time in my life, or since I've been blind, I can get the program information on the screen and actually know what's on a channel. And here's the kicker. So we've had audio descriptions on television programs and movies for several years, but ironically, there has never been a way to activate that feature in an accessible manner on the television itself. So if you wanted to do it, you had to memorize the menu system, and
Wow.
you wouldn't really know if the program was audio described or not. You just had to go in there and guess and hit it, and if it didn't start talking, you just figured it wasn't. So now with these newer televisions, you've got all that information is spoken through a synthesized voice. Many of them you can actually even connect a refreshable braille display to, and it's gives you the ability to be able to operate the device and maintain some literacy, looking at the words and so forth. And so in many ways things are getting better, and in many ways they are a little bit worrying. It's nice to see. I notice here in Las Vegas, the cabs have accessible touch screens in the back seat of the cab, so you can find out. You can hear what the fare is, and I think you do there in Washington D.C. too, if I remember correctly from the last time I was there.
Yeah.
So you can pay. So yeah, you've probably seen that. I think when you get in there, it says, to activate accessibility, tap on the screen here or the right or whatever. So the ADA has made that, and other legislation has made a big difference in the lives of blind people. I was recently traveling in Frankfurt, Germany, and I was shocked to see that the room numbers in the hotel, the doors were not marked in Braille. The elevator wasn't marked in Braille. And, that's one thing that we have gotten used to here in the United States, and start taking it for granted. And it's, it's something that you just think, well, every building I go to is going to have Braille on the elevators. And that's what we hope is going to happen with this Indoor Explorer and indoor navigation features, is that, it'll be the norm for you to go into a building and be able to find room 102 or the elevator or the cafeteria or whatever.
Larry, you were mentioning a moment ago about accessibility options on electronics, and I kid you not, I was doing research for this podcast yesterday, and I have no idea how I did it, but I activated the accessibility voice prompts on my laptop. And so I couldn't figure out how to turn it off. And so for about 30 minutes, everything I was doing, I had these voice prompts. And I thought, now I get a tiny glimpse. I had never activated it before. So that was kind of funny. What do you think still needs to be done to assist visually impaired and blind travelers in airports, train stations, bus depots, other transit points?
Well, I think this indoor navigation in one form or another has got to be one of the priorities. It's interesting too, because like I mentioned, I've been going through that Louisville airport for many, many years, and I'm fine to get through it. And there's blind people all over the world that are getting through very complicated transit systems, bus stations, trains. What they need to do, though, is get used to it. They get training, but the thing that they're missing is what's around them. So it's not that this is going to suddenly enable a person that hadn't been able to do it before. They can learn the route and be very efficient at it. What this gives them is the ability to know what else is around besides their usual path. I think some kind of electronic signage, and this appears to be a really good way to do it, is probably one of the most important things in traveling for people that are blind and visually impaired.
You would think stores, especially those that don't have the aromas perhaps of a cafe or a coffee shop, would really jump to get their beacons put in their stores so that they can all of a sudden open up the availability to visually impaired travelers. I mean, if you know, as you mentioned, I think you said Brooks Brothers earlier, but if you know there's a clothing shop or a gift shop or something else that you're walking by, you may be more inclined to stop and take a look.
Well, absolutely. And one of the other aspects of this project that I'm particularly excited about is that some stores are already placing beacons for their sighted guests, and mainly to alert them that there's a sale here in this aisle, or to direct them to another aisle. And what we hope to be able to do at some point, we're not there yet quite with this, is to take advantage of those beacons and add them into this database so that it'll work with this kind of software as well. And on the other hand too, when we place beacons in the airport or any other venue, we want other people to be able to use them, not just blind applications, but other companies that may want to direct some advertising or information at people.
I was in Detroit recently, and I noticed at DTW, Detroit Metropolitan Airport, that there is a dedicated area in the main McNamara terminal for service animals, and the sign said Service Animal Relief Area. I hadn't noticed it before. Although I think you have a kind of a funny experience, even though there are some accommodations there at DTW. I think you mentioned that you were there really, really early, and there wasn't really anyone around to help out.
And that was really interesting too, because it so happened that I was able to get a GPS signal in that airport. So one of the things Nearby Explorer does is let you change your search providers. And this is what I mean by the search provider, is what gives you the points of interest around you. So I was switching between Google Places and Foursquare, and I was actually able to tell where things were, which gates were around. It wasn't a really accurate signal, because when you're indoors, I guess there must have been some big windows in there. But I was able to say, oh, there's a Wendy's over there, and get to my gate, find the bathrooms, and it was kind of neat too, because there was no one around, and I had like free reign, and I could walk around and explore a little bit.
So looking ahead to this year, the Trump administration has said that they have high interest in doing an infrastructure bill. On the campaign, President Trump had mentioned $1 trillion. Now his administration is saying about $200 billion or so. What would you and American Printing House for the Blind like to see in a possible infrastructure bill this year from the Trump administration to help blind and visually impaired travelers?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is get the input from the blind and visually impaired themselves. And that's what we're trying to do, the beginnings of with these surveys. But just in my personal opinion, I think things like this electronic signage, indoor orientation, we all know that someday GPS will be able to penetrate buildings, and you'll be able to get a location. And we've sort of future-proofed our app by putting all this information into OpenStreetMap. So when that does happen, this will just automatically work. But it's going to take a lot to get that indoor mapping in there. And I think that's probably one of the biggest infrastructure changes that would be of the most use to people, not just in airports, but in other venues, as the blind and visually impaired people themselves will prioritize.
And are those surveys of the community underway, do you think?
They are. We did 5 of them this summer, and we are continuing to do that. APH plans on sharing that data. This is probably the richest amount of data available to date on the preferences and needs of the visually impaired in relationship to accessible cities. We'll continue to do those surveys and refine what we're doing based on that information.
Listeners, it's time to see how good Larry is at forecasting. Larry, you mentioned that you began with an Apple IIe computer all those years ago. So let's go from, 1980-something, to looking into the future here. Let's get out your crystal ball and tell us what you think is coming to help visually impaired travelers 2, 5, even 10 years from now. What are we going to be seeing, do you predict?
Well, that's a great question, and I think we're starting to see the first glimpses of it now. So last year, Microsoft released a program, an app called Seeing AI. And one of the things this does is that it can read signage on the fly. So I think things like that and artificial intelligence, one of the biggest frontiers that we still have not quite conquered yet is the ability to convey graphical information to a person who is blind. So one of the things we're showing this year at the Consumer Electronics Show in our booth is a device that we're working with a company called Orbit Research on, called the Graffiti. And what this device does is has 2,600 pins that can raise to various heights, and it can take an image and translate it to a tactile graphic. And artificial intelligence is going to be a key to the future of being able to convey this kind of graphical information, because as you can imagine, well, in fact, there was a lady there with I think it was a 26 megapixel camera the other day at the booth, and she sent the picture over to the Graffiti. So, converting those 26 megapixels down to 2,600 pins with 4 varying heights on them is traditionally has taken a human to be able to simplify an image. But I think artificial intelligence is going to be a big friend of ours, not just on that, but on identifying people. One of a blind person's, I won't say worst nightmares, but a real annoyance is to walk into a room and not know who's in there. We already know not to talk about people, right? Because as soon as you do, they're going to be right behind you.
Well, I think that's a good rule for everybody, yeah.
That's absolutely. But to be able to walk into a room, identify faces, identify objects. I was just noticing here, too, at CES, there's one of the problems with the Seeing AI is that you have to hold the phone, point the camera around. So I just saw yesterday there's a cap you can mount your phone into, and I thought, well, there's the perfect answer.
Wow.
I think eventually, though, there'll be small enough cameras just to hook on the side of your earbuds or your glasses or whatever, and convey that information to this app. But yeah, so artificial intelligence, tactile graphics, complete mapping of infrastructures that are accessible are all things that we should be seeing in the next 5 to 10 years.
So we're going to follow up with you in 5 to 10 years, and we're going to see if your forecast came true. How's that?
You are on. I'm looking forward to it.
Larry Skutchan is the Director of Technology Product Research at American Printing House for the Blind, and helped create this new Indoor Explorer feature to help visually impaired passengers navigate through airports. You can follow Larry and his team on Facebook under American Printing House for the Blind, on Twitter at APH for the Blind, and on YouTube under APH American Printing House for the Blind. Larry, thank you so much for being on the Voyage Report podcast and for being such an inspiration to all of us.
My pleasure.
Listeners, what do you think about Indoor Explorer and Nearby Explorer? Do you know someone who could benefit using it, or an airport you'd like to see added? Let us know by rating this podcast, giving us a review, and sharing it on social media. We have guests every week talking about travel news and trends, so be sure to subscribe to our podcast. We'd sure appreciate your review. It helps bring more awareness to our journalism and original content. And if you have an idea for a future guest on our podcast, please reach out at voyagereport.com and let us know. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Mark Albert. Bon voyage.
You've been listening to the Voyage Report podcast. Get the scoop on travel at voyagereport.com.